the temptation was very much to go back again, as I did have a few times. And you may remember that last week we finished exactly where we'd finished a week before. And because it's some very important things, and I look at that and I think, I don't think I covered that well enough. Maybe I should go back, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to move forward. There are three chapters, especially three places that I really think that we need to get in our minds for this present day. Because in the last day, there is going to be the last day kingdoms that are going to begin with 4 kings and 4 kingdoms. And in Daniel, they're represented by the beast that represent those kingdoms. In Revelation chapter 6, they're represented by riders on the breaking of the seals. And so you have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse first, and then the breaking of the 5th seal is the martyrs, and then the breaking of the 6th seal is the preparation of the way of the kings of the east. And in Daniel, you'll see that follows exactly Daniel chapter 7. So those two chapters go together. Even though they were given hundreds of years apart, they go together. And Jesus refers us back to Daniel. Marcos, good to see you. Jesus referred us back to Daniel. And he said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. And then he tells those that are in Judea to flee to the West Bank, to flee to the mountains. And then there's thoughts that may be echoed in Revelation chapter 12. And so we can't get into everything in an hour's time, and you know that. So here's what I plan to do tonight. I wanted us to begin to look again, and for those of you that have been in this study for quite a while, you're very familiar with this, but it still need to set it for those that have not been in this study to see the correlation. And I want you to, as your homework, to study the correlation between Daniel chapter 7 and Revelation chapter 6. So very important that you do that. And then Matthew chapter 24. Those 3 chapters, very important chapters in understanding that. They all go together. They all have the same outline, although they have different symbolism in them. Now, in the first year, and I'm starting with Daniel chapter 7 and verse 1. For your convenience, I have it on your screen, and hopefully you're able to see it. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed, and he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night. I'm going to make that scoot. Wonder if I can just make that just a little there. I'm afraid that you were not being able to see all of it, so let's do it that way. I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Now, let's just stop right there for a second. And if you were all sitting here in the living room, I would look you straight in the eye, and someone would say, I know what that is. The 4 winds of heaven, what is it? Well, it's the 4 directions for one thing. So north, it starts out with actually the west. So the west is the dominant beast or character at the beginning, whether it be in Daniel chapter 7 or Revelation chapter 6, the rider on the white horse. But the rider from the west is first. And then the rider from the north takes peace from the earth. That's in Revelation chapter 6. You'll see he's the rider on the red horse. In Daniel, you'll see him as well as the bear with ribs between his teeth. And then you'll see the other beast, and there are 4 of them. Daniel was mainly only interested in the 4th beast, which is the beast of the Antichrist. And that is the subject that we're looking into at this time, and that is identifying the Antichrist and his kingdom. And so we'll be looking farther into that. So in the vision of the night, he saw the 4 winds. You could say, and the word winds here is the same as spirits, the 4 pneuma, the 4 winds of heaven, and they're stirring up the great sea. The great sea is humanity. And I've got to ask you today, do you not see that the four major philosophical beliefs and theological beliefs, whatever you want to call it, these four spirits, it's like four spiritual entities that are dividing the world. And so from the West, you're seeing what could be called Christianity, Judaism, and that which is coming from the West. From the North, you see atheism, communism, but it also, in Ezekiel 38 and 39, you'll see that they ally themselves with the Shia Muslims. Islam is divided in the Shia and the Sunni Muslims. The Shia Muslims are centered basically in Iran, and Iran is mentioned by name, actually by the word Persia in Ezekiel 38. But they are going to ally themselves with Russia against the Sunni Muslims. Sunni Muslims are generally led by Saudi Arabia, and there is a great animosity between the Shia Muslims and the Sunni Muslims, and right now there's a great amount of animosity between Russia and Saudi Arabia over this oil dispute that's going on, and you know that we're right in the middle of all of that. So right now, especially the West, with all of this things that are going on, the West is being all stirred up. You're also seeing that the North and I'm talking about from directions as from Israel or from Jerusalem, you see that to the north, that the Russians are all stirred up, and that the Iranians are all stirred up, and Turkey is all stirred up, and Syria is all stirred up. And so all of those are being moved by these winds. In the south, you see the Sunni Muslims, you see Saudi Arabia especially, and Egypt, which will join together and actually be on the side of Israel in the upcoming war. And then off to the east, on the other side of the Euphrates, you'll find the kings of the east. And those are very, very large nations. And four of the kings of the east, apparently, will be at some point, at the very end, brought forward. A 200 million man army will be brought against Israel in the last days. And it's at that point that Christ will actually come and stand on the Mount of Olives and break the mountain in half, and the Euphrates River will be dried up, and there will be a war unlike any war has been, but it's a war in which Christ himself will win. I'm not going to get into all of that tonight. I'm just saying tonight, though, can you not see that there are the kings of the east and the wind that's blowing in the east? You see that stuff going on now in China and India and all of those places. There's the west and the wind that's blowing out of the west, and there's the wind that's blowing from the north and the wind from the south, and they're stirring up humanity, and humanity is definitely stirred up. All of that is in verse 2. So Daniel said, I was looking in the night, behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And he says in verse 3, and four great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. Now these four great beasts, in the west, you'll know that there's a kingdom or a beast, but it's represented by a king. So there's the king and there is the kingdom as well. And so the four great beasts are coming up from the sea. They're different from one another. And the west is very different from what's in the north, from Russia and the Iranians and the Turkish. And the one from the south, the Sunnis, is different, and the one from the east, as far east, is very different. Those on the far side of the Euphrates. So they're very different. The first one, we're not going to look at all of those in depth. We're going mainly to look at the fourth beast, as Daniel does, but we need to look at least at this first one, and there's a reason for that. The first was like, now the first beast in order, as Daniel gives, but the last in order, as the writer of Revelation gives, as John gives in chapter 6, is the lion with eagle's wings. Who do you suppose is the lion with the eagle's wings. I believe that the lion is probably has to do with England, the emblem of England being the lion, and the wings of the eagle. I think wings of the eagle represents the United States, and so the lion that has eagle's wings is talking about the United States. And we've talked at times, and in the book that I've written, at least two of you have been working, helping me in editing that. Bonnie is online. She's my sister, and Sandy is also online, and she has read through the book and gone through and helped me with a lot of the editing, and we're still working on finishing all of that up. And so, but both had the question, it seemed to me, on this. I know Sandy wrote in one on the back of one of the pages, drew an arrow to this and said, could the coronavirus or COVID-19 be what plucks the eagle's wings? I've told you all along, I don't know what's going to pluck the eagle's wings. I have thought that probably it would be something like an EMP attack, from nuclear weapons, or it might be a cyber warfare type attack, or it could be some storm or something. I didn't know what it would be. But what would it take to pluck the eagle's wings? And what does that mean? Make it to where the eagle would not be able to fly. And also, another thing to think about is, what makes the United States able to project power into the South China Sea? Have you thought about that? I know, Steve, if you're probably listening, you probably just answered that. But one of the things that projects it into the South China Sea and keeps China at bay is our aircraft carriers. We have the ability to fly against and carry out devastating attacks against any nation in the world. And this carrier that now has, I don't remember now, but it's a large amount of their people, including their captain that came down with this COVID-19. I'm not saying that those wings have been plucked or that carrier's disabled, but it has definitely lost a lot of its edge. And you can see that the United States, because of what we're going through, that we're under a major assault. Now, am I saying that this is something that was done purposefully by the Chinese? And by the way, the Chinese also are represented by red, and so it's the rider on the red horse that takes peace from the earth that's given a great weapon. In fact, I think that I probably put it right here. When I saw one of the Lamb broke one of the seven seals, I heard one of the four, this is Revelation chapter 6, I heard one of the four living creatures saying as the voice of thunder, "Come." I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him. He went out conquering and to conquer. And that could be very easily where we were at the end of December, or close to the end of December. I put the YouTube video on from December the 10th, and when I was listening to it to try to edit to see if there was anything needed to be taken out, or anyone that stood up during the meeting or whatever, I had chills, and I told Joyce, I said, it gives me chills, it makes my hair stand up on my arms to listen to this, to realize that the very day that they trace back to and say, this is the day, December 10th, that they had their first reported case of what has been termed now the COVID-19, was on that same day that we were talking about those very things. And if you haven't seen it, you can look it up on YouTube and see. By the way, on YouTube, it's the year, then the month, and then the day, and then it'll say something about Tuesday Prophecy class. So if you look it up, you'll see it there, and I'm posting them as I can to Facebook, and that's where some will see it. Today I worked about 6 hours getting one ready, and when it got down to the last minute where it was supposed to post it, it rejected it and said, you've already put this one on, you can't put it on. And I hadn't, so I don't know what happened. I had to delete it, and so I'll have to try again. But the rider on the white horse, who do you think that is? Now, I've identified that as, I believe, that's probably talking about the Anglo-American entity. And so Anglo-American, and has not the United States and its allies and NATO, have they not had a bow and a crown? And I'm not going to get into for those of you that already know what it's about the bow, which is talking about, I believe, probably about the covenant, or the crown, which may be talking about just that it's the most powerful nation or alliance at that time, but it also could mean something very much different than that, because you'll see that the fourth beast, he ends with this one, with the lion, rather than the other way. But anyway, went out conquering and to conquer, and all that went out well until he broke the second seal. And I heard the second living creature saying, "Come," and another, a red horse, went out, and to him who sat on it, it was granted to take peace from the earth, and that men should slay one another, and a great sword was given to him. By the way, so if you've asked the question, could that rider on the red horse be China instead of Russia and Iran, and instead of the Ezekiel 38-39 war, and could the great sword be a biological weapon rather than a nuclear weapon? I would have to say I can't rule that out. I can't say it's not that. That's not what I think it is. But if that's what you think it is, I cannot say that you're wrong at this point until we see more. I will say that at this time, peace has been taken from the earth by a rider on a red horse. I will say that is true. And it's just says, and that would slay one another. The word men is been put in there because you don't know otherwise what that's talking about, and that would slay one another. However, if I get far enough along tonight, you may have a different thought about that. We'll see. But anyway, great sword was given to him. So that's the only two I'm going to do on that part. So I wanted to jump down to that. Now he said the first, I'm going back to Daniel chapter 7, the first was like a lion and had the wings of the eagle. I kept looking till the eagle's wings were plucked, and it was made to stand on the ground, and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a human mind was also given to it. And then, so the part that we just read out of that. Now, I'm going to skip down in Daniel chapter 7 a little ways, because Daniel sees all of the 4 beasts. He sees all of that, but the 4th beast is the one that really gets his attention. That's what we'll want to look at next. So we'll skip down to verse 7. Daniel chapter 7, verse 7. After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong. It had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it. It had 10 horns. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And the horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boast. So I want us to look at this passage first of all. So as he's watching this, now one of the things, by the way, I'm going to go back, but everywhere you see the Antichrist, you'll see him described as this, a mouth uttering great boast. A mouth is what he's the best known for. His mouth and his boast. That's the way you'll recognize him when the time comes. If this is reminding some of you, and some of you are already trying to jump to conclusions, please don't, because I can't think of anything much worse than to misidentify this person. There are many, many people today who have a mouth uttering great boast, and you can hear a lot of them on television, and you can hear a lot of them in the halls of Congress and a lot of other places. So let's be careful about that before you jump to any conclusions. Let's find more evidence first. Now, he said, first of all, he said, this fourth beast that he sees, it's dreadful, terrifying, and extremely strong. It had large iron teeth, devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with his feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it. The first beast that we see is the lion with the eagle's wings. The second beast is the bear with 3 ribs in his teeth. And then the third is the leopard with the 4 wings. And so the leopard, I believe, is the king of the south. So the king of the west, the lion with the eagle's wings. The king of the north, the bear with the ribs in his teeth. that the bear will also have as allies a very strange mixture, because the bear will be represented by Christianity or atheism, and the rest of those, both Islam, by Turkey and by Iran, both are Shia Muslim. And so this will be what causes their total destruction in the end. They've joined together and made common cause for a purpose. And also Syria will be joined in there as well. Okay, but then the Sunni Muslims will seem to be part of the winners of that war, because when God intervenes on Israel's behalf and that army is destroyed, both by something that falls from the sky, apparently a large block of ice, a piece of ice, so that it falls into the ground as rain, floods, ice, hail, large blocks of hail, but also molten rock and burning sulfur. All will fall upon that army. And the impact will be so great that it will create a earthquake that will shake the entire world. It's been, in recorded history, we don't know of an earthquake like that. Now, I know that if you could go back beyond recorded history, and if you could see when the day the dinosaurs died, I think you would see the exact same thing. You would see that same type of earthquake, and you would see all those same events. But this is going to be quite an event. But it's going to be very obvious that God has intervened on the side of Israel. Well, if the Sunni Muslims are also joining with Israel in this war, Israel, the United States, what is part of it, probably in the West, will be on the side of Israel, and the kings of the south of Israel, meaning Saudi Arabia and Egypt, will join together with them. Egypt will be totally destroyed, and in fact will be pretty much uninhabitable for a period of time, and you can read about that in Isaiah. After that war is over, and Egypt will almost cease to be a country, and Syria will cease to be a country. It will actually lose completely its identity as a separate country and will become part of Israel, which is what the covenant God made with Abraham said. He said, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, all that land was given by covenant to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to the children of Israel. And so after this war is over, that will be. But one of the winners in that war will be the Sunni Muslims. And the Sunni Muslims will, because I'm tempted to bring this in right now, but I may come back to it in a second. But the Sunni Muslims, because of the fact that they're from the south, will not be as devastated. The northern hemisphere nations, all of those across the northern hemisphere that we think of now as the most significant nations, those nations are going to be devastated, and they're going to be suffering such great hunger and all of that, that the Sunni Muslims, I believe, will come up with a system of Sharia law. It may not be totally Sharia law, but a system whereby they will govern, put into practice a government for the entire world. And that government is the one that the Antichrist will take over. So at the first, when we first see him, he will not be Islamic. In fact, he will be you would almost think he was anti-Islamic by his early actions. In fact, the first way you see him, according to Jesus, is the confirmation of the covenant God made with Abraham in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. And so he confirms the covenant. And so there's one of the three places in Daniel that it speaks about the abomination of desolation. Actually, it's the first place that he speaks about it. And so there he seems to be completely against the Sunni Muslims' side of it. However, within 1,260 days, he will change that, and his attitude will be completely different. 42 months is how long that he will be given after that. So he's got 1,260 days until the abomination of desolation, and he's given 42 30-day months after that, another 1,260 days. His mandate ends, the time that the dragon gives the Antichrist will be 42 months. But from the 42 months, 1,260 days, there's another 30 days to the 1,290 days, and then another 45 days to 1335. And you can see that in Daniel chapter 12. And we've looked at that, I think, from time to time, but we'll look at it again. But this one is different than all the rest. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with his feet. This kingdom is going to be a terrible, terrible kingdom. It devours, it crushes, it eats the other nations. Now they're granted, their dominion is taken away, but they are granted an extension of life, according to the Scripture. And so the kingdom in the west, the lion with the eagle's wings, the kingdom of the north, the bear, all of them except Syria, which will lose its sovereignty completely, and Egypt, which will not lose its sovereignty, but half of its nation will actually be speaking Hebrew after this is all over from the river. Where the river was, or from the Wadi of Egypt, some people say, or from the river of Egypt, that river will cease to exist for a while. But most of the nations will maintain at least some sense of their nationality. However, they will be under different governmental standards, and that government will be set up according to a different rule, a different law, and it will have, just like you may know that when the Ottoman Empire was destroyed after World War I, that the winning powers divided up the nations, and they brought nations into existence. So this is when Persia became Iran, and they gained and lost. Kurdistan ceased to exist. Iraq came into existence. Kuwait came into existence. The British Mandate became Jordan or Transjordan, and Palestine came into existence. And all of those things, there was a whole dividing up of what had been the Ottoman Empire or the Islamic Empire. Now, once the Islamic Empire, the Caliphate, has been reestablished, they will take charge and they will divide the world up into 10 regions. And in order for there to be a supply of food and a way of commerce, people will submit to that Sharia law, and they will pay this extortion that's required, or we might say taxation. And in their writings, they say it's only right that the people pay for hospitals and roads and all of that, and they will do that through what literally is extortion, but it's through taxation. So this kingdom is set up this with the 10 horns. And so he's watching that, and as he's contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them. And now at first, he's not one of the 10 horns that came into existence, but he's the one that comes up that seems to be insignificant. It's a possibility that the reason he's insignificant is because that he has been devastated by something that's took place before, and that's the plucking of the eagle's wings. That's a possibility. Or that he has been executed or killed, whatever. Or it may just be that he's somebody completely different than anyone that we could even think of at this point. But another horn, he's a little one when he comes up, but it just means that he's not significant at first. But he becomes very significant when he puts 3 of the horns out of commissions. He pulls them out by the roots. So it said he came up among them. 3 of the first horns, 3 of the first 10, were pulled out by the roots before it. So now there's only 7 of the original 10 left, and he has become now a king, but he is an 8th king. He's not one of the original 10. He's not one of the. He might have been one of the 7. I'm not going to say, although it does say that another horn, a little one, came up among them, making it seem to be that he's not one of those. I can't say that I'm absolutely sure about that, but the wording to me would seem to indicate that he's someone that would not have been thought of as one of those kings. This horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man and a mouth uttering great boast. Now you know that when the eagle with the lion with the eagle's wings, when the eagle's wings are plucked, the lion is made to stand on its own 2 feet, or the kingdom is made to stand on its 2 feet like a man, and the mind or the heart, and it could be either interpretation, was given to it. It's a possibility here where it says like the eyes of a man, that it could be talking about the same, but I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying that's a possibility. A mouth uttering great boast is how he is characterized, and he'll be characterized that way several different places. So that's down through verse 8, I believe. And then I'm going to skip down to Daniel chapter 7, verse 15. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me, and I can imagine that would be the case. I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him. Now, one of those who were standing by would be Gabriel at this point. Gabriel's an angel of God that had been tasked. He was taking care of business with the kings of Persia, but he has been tasked. Michael the archangel has gone and relieved him of the task in Daniel, and so he has come to be a messenger from God. And apparently, he is one who can communicate easily with men without being so... he is frightful, there's no doubt about that. And yet, he many times is the one that God uses to talk to Daniel, yes, to Mary, to Joseph, or whoever it might be, or to Zechariah, or whatever. So he's one that communicates like in that way. But he's standing by. And so Daniel's watching this vision, and then he sees this angel standing by. It looks like a man, and he begins to ask him the exact meaning of all this. So he says, what is the exact meaning of all this? So he told me. Now, I will say this, you'd have to realize and look and see that sometimes when Daniel sees Gabriel, it scares him to death, and to the point of almost dying, and Gabriel has to strengthen him in order for him to be able to even receive the message. But so many times it leaves him weak or sick or other ways. But at this point, he needs to know what this is all about. And so Gabriel is going to tell him. Doesn't mean he's going to write it down, but that doesn't mean he understands it, because it's going to be clear later that he doesn't. But he wants to know. He begins asking. He has that curiosity. What is the exact meaning of all this? So he can write it down. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. So here's the interpretation. These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. Now, we know that at some point in history, that this moment, that is thousands of years in the future, when Daniel sees this vision, and when Gabriel tells him about this, at some point, we will approach that time, if we have not already, and this will come into existence. And so 4 kings will be upon the earth, or 4 kingdoms will be upon the earth at a point in history. If you were to say, how far could we possibly be in this passage? This is where I would draw that line and say, it's a possibility that these 4 kings are revealed today in the east, and in the west first, in the north, the south, and then later in the east. It's a possibility those 4 kings and 4 kingdoms exist on the earth today. So you could draw your line right there and say, this is where we are. Now, after the third beast, this first set of kingdoms is set up, this 4th one comes in, and he comes in as part of the third. He's taking over the Sharia law, the Islam, if I'm right in that. And so it appears that he converts to Islam, but not really. He is something completely different. The reality is he only knows one God, and that is himself. He knows the beast, the dragon that has brought him into power, or that will bring him into power when he's raised from this deadly wound that he suffers. And the one that raised him is the one that he acknowledges. And it is not really Islam, and it is not the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the children of Israel. It's not the Christian God that he at one time would have acknowledged. It's not the kings of the East. It's not Confucius or any of those. It is a God that he believes has brought him back from the dead and raised him through through this process of, I want to say apotheosis or apotheosis. You could say it if you speak Greek better than I do. You choose which one you like, apotheosis or apotheosis. But anyway, but through this process, he is raised from the dead, but he's raised with this knowledge that he worships a God that's completely different than any of these. And really the God that he worships is the God that's in him. He sees himself. And in fact, he will be vying for Godship. And in fact, that's why probably that Satan will learn to hate him so that Satan will hate him as much as God loves Jesus. Satan will hate the Antichrist in due time. And he'll also hate the prostitute city Babylon in due time. Just as much as God loves Jerusalem. And so, but in this time, when he rises, there's a point halfway through the period of time from the confirmation of the covenant. He'll confirm the covenant, and you could begin to mark your calendar for 1,260 days. But as you approach the end of that 3.5 years, you better be looking very carefully for one who will be fighting battles in the Middle East. And you can look at Daniel and you'll see that he's fighting those battles and the things that are going on there, and be watching, because he is going to either he will take his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. And you can read about that in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 2 and following. But he's going to do that. But they're also going to set up the image of the beast in that place. At that point, God will have revealed to you what you're to do. And so he talks about, both in Revelation and in Matthew 24, what does he say? Let those who are in Judea flee. If you're in Judea, in the West Bank, you better flee to the wilderness. I'm not saying that if you're in the cities of the earth, in other nations, that you should flee. I don't know that. I can't give you that. God has got to make that more clear to us at that time. My hope, had you known this epidemic was coming, this pandemic, would you have been in the city, or would you have been camping out in one of the wilderness areas in your tent and waiting for all this to pass? I mean, if you really had known what was coming, would you have taken your family possibly and said, you know what, we're going to go backpacking, we're going to go whatever, and you'd have gone into a wilderness possibly, and you would have taken care of things there had you known that it was coming. You didn't know that, and so you were caught in the city. Today we're in lockdown, and you know that the governor has, I got an alert on my phone, you did on yours as well, I'm sure, saying you are locked down, you're not to leave your home, all of those sorts of things. And, you know, it sounds like a Amber Alert, but it's not. It's an alert that comes on our phones, and it tells us that we've got to stay in the house. And how many think that everybody's going to stay in their house, or anybody's going to do anything different than they were doing already? And so some people are going to, and some people are not going to. My encouragement of you, for this point, you're caught in the city. You need to do what you're told to do by the governmental authorities. Wash your hands. I started to say wash your hands every 20 seconds. That'd probably be a little often, but maybe every 20 minutes for 20 seconds would help. I'm thinking I have never washed my hands so many times in all my life. I can't believe and I'm not joking. Joyce knows that to be this. And I use soap, and I use a bunch of it. And my hands are chapped, but not nearly as chapped as I thought they would be. And so all of that. But I would have done things differently. I would say that. I would have found a place. I know of a place where that a person could take your RV, your motorhome, or your tent, and there's a creek there, a stream, and or water is coming out through a pipe, and you could just stay there, and you could stay at that campground and be not in contact with anybody for a period of time. That would have been a nice thing to do. When you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. That might be for you as well. You're watching for that coming. And you know that if you get caught in the city, you see what can happen. The city will be locked down, and you'll not be able to leave. Now, in America, they don't beat you I was seeing in I don't know what nation it was. It looked like it was either, it was a foreign nation. But there were 3 or 4 policemen, and they run down the street, and there were some guys out on the street selling things, and somebody had a little shop open there. And each of the policemen that came by slapped each of those guys in the face just as hard as they could. And then they took out sticks that looked like they were maybe 4 foot long, 3 foot long probably. And but there were sticks about the size of a broomstick or something, just rods. And so that makes me think it was Indonesia, because that's what they actually do there, from what I understand. But they were beating those guys on the legs. I'm not talking about on the backs of the legs. They were beating them on the shins and like that. And you could see the guys, they were crying. They were jumping up and down trying to find a way, but they knew better than to do anything to fight back. But they were caught out after they had been told that they were to quarantine themselves. We don't do that in the States, but I will tell you, the government will change, and when it does, you may find yourself in that kind of situation. To be caught out could cost you that. Now, it's at this time that you'll get to the breaking of the 5th seal. So that you break the 4th seals, and the breaking of the 5th seals is the saints under the altar. That's the same thing that you see here. So you see these 4 kingdoms, and then you see that the deal of the saints, verse 18 of chapter 7 of Daniel. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all ages to come. So there is going to be a time of great persecution against the Christians. And so this is a promise to you as the saints of the highest one, that you will receive the kingdom. You'll possess the kingdom forever and ever, for all ages to come. So Daniel says, I would desire to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, which devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. So all over the world, all the world will be brought under its dominion, devoured, crushed, trampled down under its feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn, and notice this, the other horn which came up, for which 3 of them fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth uttering great boast. Everywhere you see him, you'll see this about him. He has eyes, he has human eyes, and he has a mouth uttering great boast. What is it that you see about him that is the most, I'm going to call it an attribute, because Pastor Charlie used that word the other day, but what is the attribute? What is the characteristic by which he will be mostly or most greatly known? He has a mouth uttering great boast, and he puffs himself up. He's larger in appearance than his associates. He will seem larger than life, and he will be uttering these great boasts as he comes into power. And he will not be in power at first. In fact, he'll be a very little horn. But as he comes into power, he will suddenly he will be boasting. At first, he will be boasting against other kings and against his enemies and against all those other things, all the others that might compare themselves to him. He will be bigger than they are, and he will be boasting about that. However, what gets him in real trouble is he will begin to boast against God himself. He will honor Satan. Nevertheless, he believes that he's greater than Satan, and that in due time he will put the dragon in his place. But the dragon knows that he will put him in his place when he takes back the spirit that he's placed within him. He has a spirit within him that is this spirit of boasting and the spirit of this puffing up, and which is a sin, as it makes it absolutely clear in the Scripture. So he, but that spirit will be taken from him when Christ comes. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them. This is the equivalent then of Revelation chapter 6 and the breaking of the 5th seal, where the souls are under the altar. He's waging war with the saints and overpowering them. And you might say, well, the saints is talking about there, surely are talking about the Jews, because the Christians won't be there. But you know as well as I do, probably by now, that if you read Zechariah chapter 12, 13, and 14, you see that the Jews, those Jews that are left after the war, by the way, there's not going to be that many of the Jews that are alive at the beginning of the war that's going to be left after the war. The ones that are left, and the ones that are scattered throughout the nations will be brought back there, and for various reasons I won't get into tonight, but they'll be brought back into the land. But those that are brought back will look upon the one that they pierced, and they will weep for him as for an only child. And they will see the one that has been pierced, and they will trust and believe on him, and they will join with the saints. And so the war is against those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus, as you'll read in the last verse of Revelation chapter 13. We won't get into that tonight. I know that we're going to run out of time. You'd think I'm sitting in my own house and just here with my mom and my wife, that with Joyce, that we ought to be able to go as long as we want. But anyway, but we're going to still be respectful of everybody's time. And how long does he wage war? Until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. And the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. So he will wage war until Christ returns. So the end of this age is going to be an age of war against the Christians and war against the Jews, because the Jews and the Christians will be together. The prodigal son will have come home, and the older son, the one that's maintained the father's business in all of this time, the one that looks almost with jealousy upon the prodigal, will finally be joined together with them in the days that will come. And together, the two will be bound together to be the saints who will possess the kingdom. And so when it talks about war against the saints, understand it is talking about the Jews, and it's just talking about the Christian. But it's talking about Messianic Jews. It's talking about Christian Jews at that point. I know that we're running out of time. I want to go just as fast as I can, as far as I can, but I will stop in about four more minutes. And it'll make it clear that it's talking later about the dragon. But from this passage, it looks like it could also be Daniel or John, that he stood on the sand of the seashore. I'm in Revelation 13:1, and standing on the sand of the seashore, and I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems. On his heads were blasphemous names, and the beast which I saw was like a leopard. Now, here, John takes them in reverse order. So I told you that the leopard was, I believe, talking about Sunni Muslims that will take over that will crush the earth and bring it into power, and will bring in the 10-nation confederacy, or the 10-region confederacy. This beast, he said, it was like a leopard. Its feet were like those of the bear. The bear, you remember, are the kings of the north. And the one that, and you can read about that in Joel chapter 2 and Ezekiel 38, 39 and all. But notice the mouth. His mouth was the mouth of the lion. Now, the mouth is what this one is known for. And so he tells them backwards. The one that started it off was the lion with eagle's wings. Now, the one that finishes the description is the mouth of the lion. The dragon gave him his power and his throne and his great authority. And in fact, he'll give him authority for 42 months. I saw one of the heads as if it had been slain. This is where I'd hoped we'd get to tonight. You wouldn't believe how I've had to rush to get here. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. We've talked about this several times. What does it mean, his fatal wound was healed? I was wanting to look up especially the words or the idea as if it had been slain. And I thought, what is the word as if? And so I looked it all up in the Greek, but while I was there, I went ahead and did a little bit of a study of this verse. And guess what I found? You know what the fatal wound that it's talking about? The word wound there is in the Greek is the word plague, which is the word, the transliteration of which is the word that we use for the word plague. And it says his fatal plague was healed. I'm not saying that the plague is what that's talking about, but that was one of those things that in all of this time of studying, I've never noticed that when it talked about the fatal wound, that it said that it was actually the word plague. And the definition of it is a stroke, or by implication, a wound, figuratively, a calamity. It could be a plague, a stripe or a wound, or it means he was wounded. But here's the thing. Notice this, that the wound or the plague is healed. I thought that was interesting. And so I'm going to make that small. I'm not going to make it that small. That was crazy. Let's see. Let's just make it about this size. How would that be? But the main thing I want you to see of that, one of his heads had been slain, his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, who's like the beast, and who's able to make war with him? And there was given to him, now who do we recognize here? This is the one whose fatal wound was healed. There was given to him, or whose deadly plague was healed, is what it actually says, literally in the Greek. There was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. I'm going to have to stop at that point.